Hey guys, what's up? So today I wanted to share a little bit of my personal philosophy and how it happened. I've mentioned a couple of times on my podcast here or in my videos that when I was 6 years old, my life took sort of a dark turn, and I really wanted to share what that turn was. Well, I don't want I don't want to share it, but I feel like it helps you understand my point of view a little bit. So, like I said, my story is kind of a dark one. But before it was a dark one, it was actually a very sunny one. Now, I didn't have rich parents. My dad worked on the road a lot. My mom stayed at home. And she always encouraged me to be an artist when I was very young. So 3, 4, 5 years old. She introduced me to artists. She took me to the local folk art museum. She always had fun little creative projects around the house, even when it came to food. So back in the late 80s and early 90s, we got this thing called snow every winter. And every time it would snow, we would make our own snow cones, for instance. But she always did everything she could to foster my creativity when I was a tiny kid. She was an artist herself. She was really into architecture and engineering. And, I grew up being creative. But when I was 6 years old, my mom had an affair. So like I said, my dad worked on the road a lot, and my mom had an affair. But she tried to end that affair. And when she tried to end it, the man she was seeing shot and killed her. That was actually how my dad found out that she was having an affair. And after her murder, my dad had a really hard time being around me. I guess it was hard to be around someone, even his own son. It was hard to be around someone who reminded him of her and everything she did. It was a lot to process. So he understandably, now looking back, he disappeared for a few years, and my grandparents took me in. Now they did everything they could for me, but that's a hard thing to do when you have a little kid who just had his first real experience with true destruction, and that experience started to shape my view of the world and my personal philosophy even at a very young age. I was a creative child faced with unbelievable destruction. My grandparents recognized the need to address my nightmares. They recognized the need to get me into therapy. And part of the therapy I went through when I was 6, trying to recover from the trauma as best as any 6-year-old possibly could, was play therapy and art therapy. Now, I can't remember my therapist's name, but she encouraged me to draw my nightmares so that I could get them out of my head and somehow tangible. And this therapy was probably the first time I picked up so much as a crayon after my mom was killed. And it actually helped. It helped a lot to address my nightmares and just get them out of my head and onto a page. So Years of therapy. We'll fast forward a few years, and my dad comes back into the picture with a a stepmother. My dad still had trouble being around me, and my stepmother, well, she had her own opinions about my mom, and that's a whole thing on its own. So being back with my dad after years of not seeing him, not getting a birthday card, none of that stuff, being back with my dad with a stepmom who both didn't really seem to want me there, I started depending on art as an escape from my reality. And their marriage was not a good one either. They argued constantly. I don't remember if I was the cause of that, but the marriage lasted about a year, most of which I've actually forgotten, except for the fact that I started drawing Mortal Kombat and Marvel characters nonstop, and then I started trying to make up my own. So after the marriage ended, I landed back with my grandparents, my beautiful, amazing grandparents, who again did everything they could for me. They did everything they could to foster my interest in art. They got me back into schools that I was familiar with. They just did everything they could for me. And not long after I moved back in with my grandparents, I got my first compliment from a peer on my art. But I didn't see it as a compliment at all. Because, well, here's the story. It was on the school bus, and I was drawing Venom from the Venom Lethal Protector arc. It's the first set of comic books I ever owned, and I still do to this day, over 20 years later. But I was obsessively drawing Venom, and someone on the school bus accused me of tracing. Oh, that got under my skin. So we fought on the school bus, and I lost. But I really wanted to get better at art to prove them wrong about my drawing skills. And I think I was 10 or 11 at this point. So my obsession with drawing and creativity deepened. Now, the rest of my public school experience is sort of a dark spiral downward. So I was the weird kid, well, not obviously. I had some problems, and I ended up spiraling downward, and things really got worse for me in the late 90s after the Columbine school shooting. So when a couple of outcast kids snap and commit the first mass school shooting, the other outcast kids across the country, myself included, got beat up and picked on out of fear because I was one of the freaks. And it wasn't a whole lot of fun. So I did more art and drugs, and I dove into one toxic relationship after another. And I got into skating, which was awesome, and computer hacking, which got me in a lot of trouble. But I followed my obsessions as an escape whenever I could. Some of it was creative, but most of the time it was actually really destructive. I'm really fortunate that that seed of creativity and positive growth kept pulling me back to sanity through it all. But nothing really clicked for me until my son was born. I had all of these patterns in my life. So it was a pattern of creation and destruction, back and forth. But when my son was born, this was a life that I created with my amazing fiance at the time. Now she's my wife. It was something that we made a person. We made a person together. It was a binary moment in my life where I went from not a dad to a dad. And I realized something about myself that I wanted to amplify because I had to set an example for him. Now, at this point in my life, I'd already cleaned up a lot of my destructive habits. A lot of them, but not all of them. So I was drug-free, but I was still in a job that I didn't enjoy, even though it paid the bills pretty well. But I knew that I didn't want my son to grow up surrounded by destruction or any of the negative things that I grew up with. So this is the point in my life where I really developed my personal philosophy to really be creative rather than destructive. Because destruction is easy. It's not hard to break things. It's not hard to pull a gun and end something. It's not hard to grab a baseball bat and break whatever you want to break. It's not hard to do, but what's hard to do is to make something, and more than that, to make better things. To make a better world. That's not easy. To make a more beautiful world. But that's what I want for my kids. I want my kids to be in a more beautiful world, a better world. That's what I want them to grow up with. This attitude of creativity and abundance. You read any religious text, and I'm not religious, but if you read any religious text, it all starts with something that the deity did. So in the case of the Bible, in the beginning, God created something. God created light. I think that's something we all have the capability to do as people, to create. Now, as a not religious person, I'm still a philosophical one. And it is my philosophy that we all have the power of a little bit of a God in us, because we all have the capacity to make things. And I hope that I can make this philosophy spread. Yeah. So we've come full circle from darkness to hopefully a very light subject, or a subject about spreading more light to the rest of the world. And I hope it makes sense. I hope that my path to where I am now can serve as a bit of inspiration and even hope, because we could all use a little more of that. On that note, thank you so much for watching and listening. I'm sorry if things got a little too intense, but we all have our stories to share, and now you know a lot of mine. If you want more art and introspection, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And if you want to share this story, that's why it's out there now. So thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. And until then, keep drawing, painting, writing, or dancing your heart out, and we'll talk soon.